Former LSU fullback, halfback Jacob Hester had some comments the other day about Georgia that really got me thinking, like, wait a second, hey, why are we doubting this? Or why would we just assume that this is going to be worse? I think that Georgia's reaching a new level on a yearly basis in terms of replacing its talent. And that's what this is surrounded by. He said, look at what they're replacing, and we all just say, oh, they'll be fine. And I think more on our side of it, yes, I mean, Georgia will be fine. I think saying that Georgia's a serious national championship contender, believing that Georgia has an opportunity to go 12-0 and all of this stuff, I think that that's me saying, that's us saying, that's generally college football reporters, experts around the country saying that Georgia's going to be just fine, even though they're losing a lot of talent. What are they losing this year? They're losing Brock Bowers, they're losing Lat McConkey, losing some big names on the offense. But in the secondary, a group that keeps getting fingers pointed at it. Everyone keeps saying this about Georgia and that about Georgia. And every once in a while there's a but. And the but is the secondary. People are like, well, every position group has no flaws, but you know, that secondary room lacks experience. True statement. It does as a general group. When you look at one corner is going to be a new starter, and there's going to be a safety starter and a nickel starter that are going to be new. Well, Georgia's been in this situation before, and guess what? They won a national championship in 2022. Why? Darian Kendrick leaves in 2021. Darian Kendrick, experienced guy, not super experienced with Georgia, but he had been around the block and then played a really good final year at Georgia after he transferred from Clemson. Keely Ringo's on the opposite side. He was a fresh starter. They won the championship in 2021. Yes, a lot of circumstances. The defense was very, very good in 2021. But my point, again, is that I think the defense will be very, very good in 2024. Not as good as 2021. That is Georgia's best defense of all time. It's going to be probably a while before we see something like that again, especially from the same program. Well, Darian Kendrick's gone. Keely Ring, Lewis Seen is out the door. Well, what happens in 2024 or 2022? Kamar Lassiter steps up. Javon Bullard earns the starting spot. And then Malachi Starks earns the starting spot all in 2022. Well, guess what? Malachi Starks was a true freshman who got that safety spot. Christopher Smith moves over basically, and Malachi goes to more of the free safety role. Javon Bullard takes what was mostly William Poole's job as a sophomore in 2022 in that nickelback spot. And Kamar Lassiter, as a sophomore, a true sophomore, moves up to Keely Ringo's spot as Keely Ringo moves over to Darian Kendrick's spot. So we have seen, this is not devil's advocate. This is me revisiting the conversation about Georgia's secondary, which we have assumed that this is the weak point for Georgia. That's what's going to be holding them back. Did the secondary hold Georgia back in 2022? No, it was maybe a little bit close when you think about the Ohio State game, but you're thinking about C.J. Stroud, you're thinking about Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka, Julian Fleming, Paris Johnson, a stacked offense that was distributed by an NFL quarterback, by a high-level NFL starter in his first year. So we know that the deal was with Ohio State. Malachi Starks got beat. The corners got beat by Marvin Harrison Jr. But my point being is Georgia won a national championship after being in this exact situation with its secondary, which is the most common group that's getting its fingers pointed at as Georgia's weakest link on this defense. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post talking about the secondary in a new light with my, not new information, but newly discovered a little bit information, at least going back to the well and digging a little bit more. Why should we expect Georgia to be fine? Is essentially what Jacob Hester proposed, right? That Georgia, everyone thinks, they're going to be just fine. Because they've shown on a yearly basis that they can replace the talent. Ernest Green replaces Broderick Jones, who replaced other guys at tackle, right? Tate Ratledge replaced people at tackle. They replaced these guys over the last few years, and they've been winning at a very high rate. Carson Beck is not the reason why Georgia did not go to the national championship last year. All right, there's more than one reason. Maybe he is infused into that, and maybe his performance against Alabama, which ultimately, yes, the SEC championship against Alabama is the main thing that kept Georgia out of the national championship. And then what I would argue is incompetence in the committee is the second thing. So I'd really say that there are two reasons why Georgia didn't make it. Losing to Alabama, and a committee probably just not seeing it the same way that I see it, the way that a lot of people saw it with the top four. And that's over now. But it wasn't Carson Beck who, it wasn't just his fault that Georgia didn't go. And they were coming off a year where Stetson Bennett helped lead them to 2 national championships. Well, they replaced it with a quarterback that put up just as good a numbers as Stetson did. And now it seems primed to put up better numbers. Plug in, play, and replace. It's the machine that Georgia has built now. And I think that with the secondary, it's very obvious. And you see, just look at the secondary over. I'd be better off Googling it, and I will Google it while I try to rattle off some of these names. But you go back to guys like Mark Webb a few years back, and Tyson Campbell and Eric Stokes. It starts there. And then it transferred to Lewis Cine and Christopher Smith and all of these guys. They've put out a ton of secondary talent into the NFL. And I think that it goes to show that looking at this year and thinking about, well, this group is very inexperienced. This group might hurt Georgia. Now, look, timeout while I'm saying that, because I've said that a few times. Georgia is very, very good. Georgia is stacked everywhere. I don't expect there to be serious flaws on this Georgia team, and these players are super talented, right? Who are the new faces we're going to see on the field likely this year? Well, I think Dan Jackson might rope his way back on there a little bit. I think if you're going to see a freshman in the secondary, it seems that KJ Bolden is the most likely to break through. Maybe he beats out and wins the star position or one of the safety spots. Kind of doubt it. Usually freshmen just don't. Even if Kirby says that KJ is ahead of where Malachi is, I'm not 100% sure that's going to happen. I'm not as confident as I was as when Malachi Starks was winning that job, but just because I think there's a little bit more competition than there was when Malachi bursted onto the scene and won that job, where he was, clearly the best in the freshman class and arguably the best secondary guy they had in the sophomore class. But they also had Javon Bullard and Kamari Lassiter in that year. You can't just say that those guys they're going to be the weak link when they're really good football players, right? Janelle Aguero, a candidate to be one of the starters, most likely in that nickelback position. It seems that he is competing with Ja'Cory Thomas for that spot. Well, these guys are 4- and 5-star players who have been practicing against Georgia starters in practice. Why are backups so good? Why is Georgia plug and play so easily? What's the real answer? Because they are so stacked across the board. When you go to practice and you go even down to the scout team, a lot of football players are really good, and it's good on good, and they get better in practice. Stetson had to go up against behemoths in practice. Carson had to go up against these guys like Jordan Davis and these guys, right? And this is why they get better. So what has Janelle Aguero and Ja'Cory Thomas and, possibly KJ or anybody who may be a new starter in the secondary, Julian Humphrey, what have they gone against in practice? They've gone against NFL talent. Julian Humphrey, last 2 years ago, probably had to line up against A.D. Mitchell a little bit in practice, a guy that needs the NFL. Definitely had to line up against Lad McConkey, Dominic Lovett, Robert Thomas. These are guys that have NFL potential if they've not already made it to the NFL. So I think that we need to reevaluate our thought process on the inexperienced part, because you can go through and look at the position groups and on national championship teams for Georgia and say, well, they had to replace them that year. What makes this year so different, especially when we're talking about how stacked Georgia's team is this year? Food for thought. Thank you for watching. Link for the newsletter is below.